Hey, what's going on, everybody? Sean from planningfire.com here. Welcome back to the Rich Dad, Poor Dad series. Welcome to Lesson 2, Why Teach Financial Literacy. Financial literacy has been a real hot topic for me, especially lately. Basically, it's very interesting that we teach a lot of different things in schools, whether that's culinary arts, history, fine arts, math, sciences, etc. But what we don't really do a great job of, especially in the American school systems, is teaching financial literacy. And it's such an important topic. Basically, it's the one thing everyone in their entire lives will absolutely use at some point or another. Whether you're the poor person scraping by trying to make sure you can afford rent, rice, and beans, or if you're incredibly rich and you're wondering, what's my tax benefit going to be for buying this yacht? It's still going to impact you in some way, shape, or form. It's the great equalizer. So, in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, rule number 1 in this chapter is know the difference between an asset and a liability. He goes on to say that a lot of people will classify assets incorrectly. They'll think that their liabilities are actually assets. And that really causes them to lose track of how their money's making or not making money. Basically, rich people will go take their cash and buy assets that generate more cash. Poor people will go and buy things that actually lose them money. Whether that's a car driven fresh off the lot, new coat of paint, or it could be an investment in a house that you live in. A lot of that cash gets tied up and prevents you from getting into future opportunities. We're going to talk more about that later. But it's an interesting concept to kick off the chapter. So we talk about how the quest for the financial dream turns truly into a financial nightmare. And once again, we hammer home that concept. Basically, if you have poor financial literacy, you may go and make decisions that actually cost you down the line, that opportunity cost. Buying a house that's too much house for you to live in, for example, is a great way to take your extra income and lose those asset-producing opportunities available to you. Because if you live above your means in a house that's too large, you can't save appropriately. If you can't save appropriately, you can't go and then buy these assets that'll make you more money down the road. Now, in this chapter, they make one very interesting point that really drove it home for me. If I asked you, what's your number one expense? Odds are you're probably going to say mortgage, food, travel, who knows, it could be any number of things. But the author calls out that your number one expense is truly income tax. And that really blew my mind. I never even considered income tax as an expense. And that's really one key thing that's keeping me from maximizing my income potential. We'll talk more about it later, but there's a lot of advantages and a lot of ways to make sure you're leveraging and getting the most out of your taxable income, reducing your tax burden so that way you can reduce this number one expense. So with this realization, they actually find the author and his friend becoming more and more of a problem in school. They weren't getting the best grades, they weren't studying because they could identify this weird trap that schools had them in. So right around the age of 16, their grades started slipping dramatically. Schools are great at one thing, and that's teaching you to become an excellent employee. Now, of course, once you get into college, if say, for example, you get an MBA, they'll break you of those chains. But in our traditional high school system, you're taught to specialize, get a good job with a nice pension, perhaps good insurance, and then ride it out. That's your retirement plan. So it's very interesting how that caused them to start doubting the school system. Him and his educated dad were starting to have some problems. They didn't see money in the same way, and this caused a bit of an issue when it came down to having these discussions. They would sometimes get into heated arguments about how a house, especially one that you lived in, wasn't actually an asset, but in fact a liability. Also, one thing that really drove home this point is basically you have Rich Dad, someone who dropped out of high school, now bossing around and interacting with people who have grad school degrees. So he dropped out of high school, and now people are working for him who have these advanced degrees. It's actually one really interesting way that he drives home that point. So they close this out by saying, why do the rich get richer? And this is something we've hammered home, but it's really important to take away. The rich get richer because they take their cash and they turn it into assets that produce cash. It's a really important way to think. That way, the more assets you have, the more cash you gain, which means the more assets you have and the more cash you gain. It's a never-ending feedback loop. And then they say, why do the middle class struggle? And the middle class struggle because they're not broken of this mindset. So basically, as income increases, so don't expenses, because they don't understand the very core concepts of financial literacy. Lifestyle creep, lifestyle inflation, whatever you may have heard of it in the past, is still very present in their lives. They don't realize that they have to separate their income from their expenses. If you start to live like you made more money, then all of a sudden you need more money to live, and you get caught in that loop. So in conclusion, lesson 2, another great lesson, very eye-opening. I mean, again, in reality, is it very simple? Absolutely. But it's so key to call out. And quite frankly, I highly recommend this book. If you want to read that with me, the link's in the description box below. If you like this content, I'd love a thumbs up. Any comments, feel free to join the discussion at planningfire.com or leave a comment below. Always looking for feedback. I'm Sean at planningfire.com. Until next time, I hope everyone has a great day.